to Charlie Chaplin. Welcome back here to Tech Tuesday on Northwest Digital News. Kevin Hunter with Harry Brailsford here on the broadcast, and we're going to be talking about Linux and all the various levels of permissions. Take it away, Harry.
All righty. Well, it's a pleasure to be back. And listeners will recall last week we declared the month of June as Linux month, and it's a stretch. And we're going to start doing more stretching as we move forward. So last week we kind of talked about the entities, and you're welcome to certainly go back and review that show up on your various mediums. We talked about a user, a group, and then a broader category called all. This week, we're going to drop down into permissions. And the key in Linux and other operating systems are the read, write, and execute permissions for all user group, all user types. So user, group, and all. Maybe we can why don't we take a little bit closer look at the read permission.
All right.
So with the read permission, it's quite frankly, it's just as it sounds. We have a little cartoon character here who likes to read. The read permission, obviously, anybody needs that. Let's think this through. If someone is working with you, short of a bad guy or someone you do not want to read a file, but if they're just a colleague, a coworker, someone who's maybe on a team, everyone would need the read permission in order to accomplish their task, which leads us maybe to the next conversation, and it would be the write permission. And again, this is a simple concept. Kevin, as you get more into it, you realize Linux is not necessarily the big boogeyman we sometimes think it is up here in the Pacific Northwest, and so on. It's pretty straightforward. Gets a little more command liney in just a little while, but the write permission. It gives you the permission in the directory to read, add, remove, or rename files. I'm going to repeat that. The write permission gives you the permission in the directory to read, add, remove, or rename the file, which takes us to the execute permission. And the execute permission, again, conceptually easy to understand, so you would execute a file, you would execute a program. But let me tell you what it also means. As an example, user that doesn't have the execute permission here will receive an error message in trying to open or run the file. You see the error message at the bottom. Now this is, we're starting to move up the food chain. So the read permission's one thing, the write permission's another thing, but the execute permission's a whole nother ballgame. So with that said, I want to jump into some examples. We're looking at Linux at the command line. Now, a lot of people recall that this looks a lot like MS-DOS, and
yes,
that is true. Yes, and that's why you should not be afraid of Linux. Use the summertime to stretch a little bit, learn a little bit. And so what we're seeing is, I'm going to try to articulate this. I don't know how well I'll do it, but what we're basically seeing here are buckets. Okay, so that little call out underneath the main screen where you see -RW, minus R minus minus. That's actually 4 buckets. If there's anyone out there from the technical side and you work with TCP/IP, a protocol, it's analogous to the octets, octet position 1, 2, 3, 4. But let's stick with buckets. So the first bucket is actually just that single line. And the second bucket, the hyphen in my little call out.
Mm-hmm.
The single hyphen is the first bucket, and if it has the D next to it, which you can see on the broader example, that means it relates to a directory. If it doesn't have the D, we're not laying down the commands at the directory level. The next 3 positions in my call out, that would be RW minus, relates to I'll go into that in a minute. I'll tell you what. Let me not get the cart before the horse. What I'd like to do is show a permission slip to you that explains the concept of the permissions. So, again, the read permission, the write permission, the execute permission, and the no permission, which would be the hyphen.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a fun little example of some cartoon characters showing now that relate to the first bucket, okay? And the first bucket, RW, relates to the rights of the owner. So the first occurrence of RW is the access rights of the owner. Read, write, but not execute the file because of the hyphen that follows the term RW. Kevin, does that make sense? I mean,
yeah, it does.
It's quite logical when you just, folks, slow down, listen, and look. Mm-hmm. That's my biggest challenge in these technical lectures, is people get so frothy.
Yes.
So I'm going to continue with my next example. And you'll see on the screen a red line that speaks towards RW hyphen. And I'm just going to read from the screen because it's pretty clear. So this relates to the group. Okay, the group is called Guru 99. We talked about groups last week. Groups are an entity that you place users in. And folks, that's the same with Windows Server. Okay, we're not doing anything special here. So, we come from the land of Microsoft, arguably. You're going to relate to that. And so the RW is going to give the group Guru 99 read, write, but not the execute permission. Mm-hmm. And then, in the spirit of maybe we've had just about enough for week number 2, because I do want to use the month of June to get through this, we're going to look at the 4th bucket. The 4th bucket relates to that, Kevin, that end user concept, everything else concept that we talked about last week. And the term R minus minus. Kevin, you want to take a stab at what the rights of that end user are with R hyphen hyphen? What right do you think they have?
I'm guessing that because the hyphen hyphen was a no, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Well, boy, I'm making a little stab here, but I'm guessing the R is a read, and there's that's a double no following that. So that's just a stab in the dark, but that's a guess.
Sir, you win a cigar. So.
All right.
With that said, what I want to do is, again, in the spirit of a double click down into Linux in the month of June, I want to make sure we just take bites we can digest. And that's really the lecture for this week. And then the next week, we double click down even more. But Kevin, I'll tell you this, just to kind of bring this in for a landing. As you well know, I'm up in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And we're proudly Microsoft. I just showed some relatives who visited recently that at the SeaTac airport, there's a a check-in line for Microsoft employees. I mean, you talk about a company town at Alaska Airlines. And Portland is a little more open source, a little more hardware oriented. So our listeners to the south of me, heck, Kevin, there's listeners show that know more than I do. God bless them.
Well, when you mentioned that Seattle is a Microsoft city, there are cities that I have been into around the United States that when they have a major player like that in the metro area, you'll actually see that company mentioned by name, even in a lot of retail stores, and it'll say like 10 or 15% off if you're an employee from brand X. So they definitely cater to those major employers like that.
Yeah.
Well, great information today, Harry, on the read, write, and execute permissions within Linux. I hope everybody learned something from the broadcast today here. Kevin Hunter and Harry Brailsford on Tech Tuesday. Thanks for joining us.